Okay, when last we met, we were looking at our good dead friend George Berkeley and his stuff. As you might recall, Berkeley's deal was basically that he believed first that the belief in matter was a gateway drug to atheism, and that would be bad. And so what he wanted to do was eliminate matter and try to show through that once matter's out of the picture, then the world is safe for God. And so he ends up taking the view that what objects are essentially are ideas. To be is to be perceived. Then we now turn to the last bits of Berkeley. So the cause of ideas, the spirit stuff, and then of course to look at potential problems and impact from George. Now again, his objective overall is to restore faith and to refute these atheists and skeptics. And he believed that if he could show that there's no matter, that would help prove that God exists, which is kind of an interesting approach. And so his reasoning is showing there's no matter would require people to accept logically, well, if there's no matter, there must be God, thus taking care of those skeptics and, more importantly, atheists. So one way he tries to do this is similar to what Descartes did. Descartes said, well, I look at my ideas. If I can find an idea that I and myself am not the cause of, the idea must have come from the outside. And what Berkeley's going to do is look at the cause of ideas and say, well, the cause of ideas has to be not matter, has to be something else, so that's what there has to be. So he claims that ideas cannot cause other ideas. So if you have what he means by this, again with Berkeley, he doesn't think of ideas like in the very broad sense we do. So a person might say, but wait, didn't the idea of, say, the printing press eventually lead to the idea of, say, typewriters, which led to the idea of word processors, which leads to the World Wide Web? Didn't those ideas cause other ideas? And we'd say, yeah. But what Berkeley means by ideas, again, going back to my analogy, with a computer, it's kind of like a visual idea is like a JPEG file on your computer. It's literally a picture. A sound idea would be like an audio file on your computer. It's literally a sound. So for him, it's almost, not to insult him, but it's almost kind of a cartoon approach to ideas. When you draw a cartoon, and the character's thinking of something, you draw like a picture. Right. So by idea, he doesn't mean like something like the idea of a printing press or the idea of democracy. He means like a picture, of like the idea of a cat would be like a picture of a cat in your head. The idea of the meow of the cat would be the sound of the meow in your head. So he thinks that, say, the picture in your head, so to speak, can't cause another idea, or so he claims.
Okay. So like literally an idea can't create another idea.
Yeah. So I mean, going again with kind of the computer analogy, if you have like a JPEG file on your computer that's a picture of a cat, that can like cause like another
thought. Or okay.
Which the computer analogy kind of works, because a JPEG file wouldn't create another JPEG file. Now, he claims that we can see that these ideas have no power or agency in them, because much like Locke, he believes when you look in your mind, you have total access. You have like full access past your mind, even to the backstage. Now, and he says if you observe what's going on in your ideas, he claims you will see they're simply passive and inert. Again, going with the analogy of the JPEG, which works pretty well, it's just a picture. It's not a application. It's not a program. It doesn't do things. It's just there. Same with like a sound file. I mean, you can play the sound file, but it doesn't do things. It's just there. Or so he claims. Now, so step one, he claims if you get an idea, it can come from another idea. Again, in his definition of idea. Secondly, what about matter? Well, he says can't be matter because he believes he has eliminated matter. So if there is no matter, it can't cause ideas. Now, he then claims it's got to be, by process of elimination, it's got to be a substance. It's got to be stuff. So, if it can't be a material substance, and he thinks there's only two possible flavors of substance, namely material and immaterial, soul, body, soul type of deal, and there is no physical material substance, it's got to be spirit. So Descartes, Berkeley thinks there's three possibilities, ideas, nope. Material substance, nope. Well, it's got to be a substance, so it's got to be spirit. So essentially, classic argument by elimination, namely that he claims there's only these possibilities, two of them are out, so the third one's got to be the case. Now, of course, a fair criticism of Berkeley would be, well, maybe there are other options that he's not considering. But to his satisfaction, he believes he's got the three possible options, two are out, so one remains. So as he sees at this point, it's just all that's left is spirit, ghosty stuff. So then, how is he going to get from ghosty stuff to God? Because his ultimate objective is to defeat the atheist and show we must believe in God. So turning now to spirit. Much like Descartes, he believes that a spirit is one simple, undivided, active being. The mind, the soul, etc. And it has modes of operation. In one mode, it's perceiving the ideas, the understanding, and it also produces them through willing. Now, he then claims, which is going to cause him some trouble, that we don't have any idea of spirit. Now again, Berkeley's got kind of an unusual idea of idea, so you might say, well, wait, I'm talking about spirit, don't I have an idea of spirit? Berkeley would say, well, no. Because again, for him, ideas are like, pictures or, sounds in your mind. So he claims we have no idea of spirit. Why? Well, he claims ideas are, passive. Again, go with the example of a JPEG picture on your computer. It's not a program. It doesn't do things. And he thinks of the spirit as being kind of analogous to, well, I'm using a modern example. We think of it as kind of analogous to the operating system. It's doing stuff. So then, how do we thus perceive spirits? How do we, how can we say that they do exist? Well, Berkeley claims that we perceive them by their effects. So their effects, we never have an idea of spirit, he claims, never have a picture of it, but we do perceive the effects, and then we say, yep, spirit. Now, so, no ideas of spirits. What about ideas of sense? Well, his view there is this. The ones that come to the senses are ones that are dependent on his will. So, some of his ideas he manufactures himself. His spirit, creates them. He can think up in his mind. And those would be, presumably just, combining ideas, etc. But the ones of sense are similar to what Locke said. They're the ones that don't depend on his will. They just appear to him, as he says, when he opens his eyes, it's just there. So he infers this. If the idea is not coming from him, like the idea of this room and the stuff in it, then it must be coming from somewhere else. It can't be coming from another idea, because he claims ideas can't cause ideas. It can't come from matter, because there's none of that stuff according to him. So it's got to come from another spirit. So we know there are other spirits because we have ideas that we don't cause ourselves, so they have to come from other spirits, or so he claims. So this leads us to at least for Berkeley, to God. And he gives two proofs for God's existence. Proof one. He claims that we know about other spirits not because we have ideas of them, because we can't. We don't know about them directly, because we can't. We know about them by perception of motions, changes, combinations of ideas, or put another way, we have an indirect knowledge of other spirits. And again, his view is, if you have an idea in your mind that can't come from you, it's got to come from another spirit. So any ideas you have that are not from you, that is proof there's at least one other spirit out there, or so he claims. So how do we get from that to, there's a spirit out there, at least one, to God? Well, he makes use of the classic argument from design. And the argument from design works like this. We look at the world and we see some things are built and designed by us, by humans. Examples, of course, would be like the desk, clothing, water bottle, lighting, room, whiteboard, etc. But we also see that there are things that are not our creation, like the trees, the earth, the sky, the planets, us, ourselves. And so we see things that we did not create. So he infers that we can account for the stuff we create. It comes from us. Why are there tables? Us. We built it. What about the earth? Well, his answer there is there must be another spirit that created them. Because again, for him, all this stuff we're experiencing is ideas. Again, which led to kind of some weirdness, like, what are you having for lunch? Ideas. Dinner? More ideas. Breakfast tomorrow? Yeah, ideas. Unfortunately, I guess they have different flavors, so I guess it's okay, although weird. So, if there's stuff out there we didn't create, there must be something else creating them. And that, of course, if we look at the order of things, their magnificence, their beauty, their harmony, and all that good stuff, well, his claim is that if we look at the evidence of all the things that we didn't create that exist, the earth, the moon, the stars, the universe, then we have to infer that God exists. So essentially it's just a minor variation of argument from design. And the classic argument from design is basically you look at the world and you see that there are things that seem to have design. Like our hands, our eyes, the planets, etc. There can be no design without a designer. The only one up to this job is God. God exists. And Berkeley is basically doing the same thing. The only slight change is, since everything for him is not all the things we experience are ideas, God's creating all the ideas. But we normally talk about God creating objects. But for Berkeley, objects are ideas. So I was worried about that, as he conclusively proved that God exists. Yes? No?
Yes.
Okay, yes. Since it's democracy, the yes has it. Good work, Berkeley. Now he offers a second proof. Now the second proof is kind of particular to Berkeley. The first one, again, is sort of a little bit of a tweak on the standard argument from design. It's just, there's a design, no design with a designer, God exists. But this one is sort of pure Berkeley. And here's how it goes. Now he claims that we can know God at least as immediately as we know there are other people. Now, normally the problem is we often think that, or some people think that, we know other people, we're pretty confident other people exist because we see them all the time. Especially when we're like trying to find a parking space. We're pretty sure there are other people at that point. Or standing in line. And if there weren't other people, you wouldn't have to wait in line. So therefore there are other people. Now, the challenge then is proving God's existence, because you don't generally see him standing in line. And if someone takes your parking space, it's probably not God. Because he's pretty, he's not going to do that type of thing. Actually, God would probably have his own parking, I would would assume. So how does he get to God's existence? Well, he claims not only that we can immediately know God, we can know so with far more confidence than we can know the existence of other people. In other words, he thinks that if you think there are other people, this far more conclusively shows that God exists, which is kind of a bold claim. So how does he back up his bold? Well, this is how he does it. He claims any evidence you could possibly have for the existence of other people, which would typically be, ideas. Ideas of the sounds people make, the ideas of seeing what you think are people. And so you have these ideas in your mind that you think, aha, those are people, they're other people. I'm not alone in the universe. And he claims that anything that gives you evidence of there being other people far more proves, with far greater certainty, that God exists. Why? Well, this is what he claims. In terms of affecting other people, the only control we have is, according to Berkeley, is moving our limbs, which actually we don't really have because they're just ideas. But his claim that is basically a causal argument. So, crudely put, he's just like me. Actually, I wouldn't have a body, just a mind, and the idea of one. He claims that we cannot affect other people directly. That's what he claims. So, kind of crudely put, all I can do in my mind is just sit there and think. I can't make anything happen. To use a crappy analogy, it's kind of like being trying to use psychic powers, which we don't have. So you're trying to move the table of your mind, that's not going to happen. So all we can do, crudely put, is just kind of sit there and think about stuff. We can't make anything happen. And Berkeley claims that in order for what I'm thinking, thinking about talking or moving, to affect anyone else, it depends entirely on God's will. Now I'll use a crappy analogy to illustrate it. Where Berkeley seems to be barking. It's kind of like this. You think of your mind, is kind of like your smartphone. Now suppose your smartphone is not connected to a network. It's not connected to Wi-Fi or 3G or 4G or 22G or whatever G, they're G now. I think it's only 4G, I guess they're working on 5G. Now, if your phone is not connected to a network, what can you do with your phone?
Nothing.
No, you can still look at your
Pictures.
yeah. You look at your pictures, play some music, play some Angry Birds, or whatever's in it. I guess Angry Birds is that. What's in now? Candy Crush. Candy Crush is there. That's still in it? No. Behind the times. I just play really, really absurdly complicated games, with all kinds of explosions. Gotta have explosions. I like Candy Crush. There's no explosions. Can't play it. It's true. If the game doesn't have explosions, I won't play it. Even when I play chess, I have pieces ready to explode because it's funnier that way. Makes for a more exciting game. Yeah. So imagine your smartphone not connected to a network. Now you can do some stuff with it. But of course, in order to send a text or an email to someone, or Snapchat them or Instagram them, you got to be connected to the network to make that happen. Now Berkeley's view is that our mind, our spirit in isolation, would be analogous to that smartphone. It can do all, some stuff, but without the connection, it can't have any impact on other smartphones. You can't call someone, text them, or whatever. So, if you're able to call someone or text someone, that is proof, conclusive proof, that you have a network connection. The network is there. There's either Wi-Fi or 3G or 4G or some sort of connection, or radio. Now Berkeley applies the same kind of reasoning to God. He said his claim is, just using my analogy of the smartphones, they can't directly communicate with each other. You need a third party connection, Wi-Fi or cell tower. And so if you can, if you're getting ideas of other people, that conclusively proves that there is that Wi-Fi, that 3G or 4G. So, where you go with the analogy, each of us is like the smartphone, in isolation. But if we're getting, text or calls or Instagram or Snapchats or something, that's proof there's that network that's delivering that stuff to us. And for Berkeley, that's God. So, according to Berkeley, when you have the idea of my voice, that is evidence, proof that I exist, but more conclusive proof that God exists. Because without God, you wouldn't be able to hear my voice. It'd be like, going back to the phone analogy, it'd be like having an unconnected phone and I'm talking into it, but no one can hear me. But if you can hear me, that means that there's a connection. And in the case of Berkeley, God is the connection. So he thinks the fact that we're able to be aware of other people is proof that God exists, because God is what makes that all happen, because nothing could happen without God. Good argument?
No.
I don't think it
Why not?
That's too broad. It's way too broad.
How so?
Like, of course, yes, like, God did, like, start, a lot of things, but I feel like to say, like, we are here, like, I am here. Of course I'm here because of him, like, yeah, but in a sense I'm also here because of my parents. My parents never met, I wouldn't have been here. But I guess you could also say my parents wouldn't be here if God would, I don't know. Like,
I was just saying, he could have, I see what he's saying, but I just feel like he could have made a stronger argument. Like, if he had used a different example, like, the fact that, I don't know, but something more concrete instead of communicating, if he had said something like, if we look at creation, or like, how did we get here, or how did things start off in the first place as evidence that God exists, not necessarily that we interact with each other.
I feel like it's a strong argument because it goes back to his original argument about the thought and the causes of ideas, and how there's he doesn't believe what he said you have to get rid of matter, and the idea of material substances, for instance. So what for me that means is also like people can be ideas in a sense, and things and objects are ideas in a sense. So you support his original argument about the cause of ideas and how they happen, and an idea can't create another idea. So just like she was saying with as far as she's here because her parents. People use the saying like, oh, you weren't even thought of like as far as your parents, like, but there was never your parent. You were never your parents' idea to begin with. So you were always God's idea. So you would have still been here regardless if those two people had met or not, and then those two people got that connection from God. And so if you go back to his notion on the ideas of the spirit and how he feels about that, then it supports his argument about people interacting with one another. So I feel like it was pretty strong.
Yeah, true. I mean, you make a good point. If you accept all his setup,
Right.
like there's no matter and spirits. Spirits can't, ideas can't cause ideas. Ideas can be caused by spirits. Then you do. If you buy all that, then
You have no choice but to follow his final thought, right? It's his proof of God.
But of course, you can have doubts about all the
Right.
about the setup. And you might say, well, having God handling all the communication seems kind of an odd. That seems like a lot of work for God to be doing every day. Making sure that that he has to be very busy right now. Like, I'm talking and you can only hear me because God is making sure that he's like, okay, he's talking. Okay, I'll send that over to. It's almost like a switchboard operator,
Right.
connecting everything. Now, interestingly for Berkeley, having gone super busy actually thinks of as, as I say in computer technology, not a bug but a feature. So he thinks that having God being super busy all the time is actually something he wants. Although it may seem kind of odd to have God have to just run, everything, every single thing happening goes to God. But as we'll see, he thinks that's actually a good thing. So yeah, Berkeley, if all the setup works, then he probably has a decent proof. Now that he's proved God, what's God going to do? Well, one thing that God does is solve problems, potential problems in his theory. Now, going back to the sort of starting question for Berkeley, you have the classic philosophical question: if a tree falls in the forest, there's no one there to hear it, doesn't make a sound. And of course, the answer would be, on one hand, no, because sound is something you have to hear. If there's no one there to hear it, there's no sound. And of course, you can even push it back. You say, how can there be a tree in a forest if no one's there to see it? So the problem that Berkeley's got, though, is what they call in child development object permanence. And object permanence is what?
You said object permanence?
Yeah.
Sure.
Isn't it when you like think an object is something else and it's not, or something like that?
Oh, it's even more basic than that. That's when you think an object is,
Permanent.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Then when you look away, it's still,
There.
yeah, it's part of the development of kids, child development. Because before, like when you play peekaboo with kids, it's so amazing to them because they can't see it, it doesn't exist. And so, they're startled. Kids are easily startled. They're like, where did that come from? If you hide them behind your back, it's like, it doesn't exist anymore. You take it out, they're like, wow.
Oh, yeah.
They created the bunny. But eventually kids, they figure that out. And it becomes harder to entertain them because
They figured it out.
yeah, they know that once they get object permanence, they know the bunny is behind your back. So the bunny is no longer, as.
Other stuff when you be like, oh, I got your nose, and it's like, give it back. And it's
Yeah.
like, okay, you haven't registered to them yet.
Yeah. Now, the problem, the challenge with kids, of course, is when kids figure out that stuff still exists when they're not seeing it. Which in a way is kids are addressing a philosophical problem. Do things exist when I'm not perceiving them? And initially kids think they're basically Berkeley. They think, no, when I'm not perceiving it, it's not there. It's gone. So Berkeley's got a problem, which is this. To be is to be perceived. Right, I almost sound like Porky Pig there for a second. That's all, folks. So the question is, if we're not looking at something, what happens to it? So when we all leave this room, and there's no one looking in from the outside, does the room just vanish? And we think, well, that'd be kind of weird because wouldn't like the rest of the building maybe like collapse? There's no room there. Or maybe it just turns into just emptiness. So, when no one's here, there's just nothing. Of course, you can never tell because if you go and look, you're looking.
So, does Berkeley believe that if there is basically no one there to witness it, it doesn't exist?
Yeah, there's no perception. Because everything is an idea. So my backpack's an idea. This room is an idea. People's bodies are ideas. And as he sees it, to be is to be perceived. So if you're not perceived, if something's not being perceived, it doesn't exist. Because it's all, objects only exist in the mind, because they're ideas. But intuitively, do we think that, well, I can't see the inside of my backpack. Do we think that there's still stuff in the backpack? Or do we think until I open it, it's just nothing?
It's like you won't know, because when you open it, you'll perceive it. And so
Yeah.
it's like, and then if you don't open it, you just don't know.
True, it could be. Yeah, we have no way of testing it, because
Right.
if we're not looking, we're not looking.
Right.
But what do we think? Do we think, like, take the building over there? We can't see inside of it. Do we think that there's nothing in there, or do we think there's stuff there even though there's no one looking?
I feel like there's stuff there.
Yeah, you're gonna think there's
Yeah,
something
it's
there.
something new.
I feel like it's always going to be something there because there's like almost always something or someone perceiving it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's Berkeley's solution, because he's, if you ask, so what about stuff there's no people around? Like when we leave this room, or I can't see inside my backpack or my water bottle. Is there still water in the bottle, or just just not? I always think of like if you go to like a furniture store, they'll have like mock-ups, like they'll have like a cardboard computer or something on the desk, and it won't be just be a cardboard mock-up and there's nothing inside, or like a set in a movie. They'll have like the front of a building but nothing behind it. So, who's looking at things we're not looking? Well, the answer is God. So right now, there's still stuff in my backpack, because although we can't see it, God can. there's stuff in the cabinet because although we can't see it, God can. When we leave this room, he's still watching it. He's perceiving everything. So the way Berkeley solves the problem of arbitrary permanence is that, excuse me, that God is watching everything all the time. So he keeps things in existence. So when you're not looking at your apartment, it's okay, God's watching it. Now if someone breaks in, he'll just watch them steal your stuff, but that's life. So, first problem that God solves is, he solves the problem of the stuff being around, we're not looking at it, because don't worry, God's keeping an eye on things as well. Now, Berkeley's big enemy, of course, were the atheists, but he also was not a big fan of the deists. Deism, as we saw, is the view that the universe is basically a clockwork created by God. So deists, if you ask them, do you believe in God? They'd say, sure. What does God do? God creates a clockwork world, winds it up, lets it go, doesn't interfere with it. And Berkeley thought that was problematic. Why? Well, because that makes God basically just a manufacturer. He's like a contractor. Builds the world, says, here's your world, and then he's done. And Berkeley is worried that that would not be a God that would inspire faith and morality. Because, as he was aware, there are people who say, okay, God exists, but we don't really owe him anything. I mean, true, he built the world, but God is, manufactures it, he goes and does his other stuff. So what Berkeley wants is hands-on God. And here's how he does it. Going back to this, God has to be super busy. So every idea you have that's not made up in your own mind, God is a hand in that. So hearing, having the idea of my voice, God's making that happen. Seeing people walking around, God's making that happen. So God doesn't create the world and walk away. He is active with everything, every second, every moment, everywhere. And so Berkeley thinks that is, as I mentioned before, it's not a bug that God has to be so super busy. It's a feature. Because he thinks the problem with deism is that God builds a world, winds it up, walks away, and God is not dead, but he's just, he's absent. Whereas in Berkeley's view, God is here right now, constantly busy, every nanosecond.
Whose view was that about the deism? I remember.
Oh, deism. It was, most noted deists in the United States include Thomas Jefferson, for example,
Really?
Benjamin Franklin, many of the founding fathers. Because if you ask them, does God exist? They'd say, sure. But if they ask them, is God in our business all the time? They would say, no. And it's pretty much kind of a precursor. Well, in a way, we saw the transition from classic theism to atheism is a matter of how much God is involved. Like, really old school religion is God is making everything happen. Everything is handled by God. You can go back to the pagan faiths. Like you have Zeus is casting the lightning, Poseidon is working the tides, and so the gods they have full-time jobs. 24 hours a day. They're able to make like lightning or rain or whatever. And then you get to God kind of creating the world. And then you get to deism, which is God builds basically a machine that runs itself. And so God is much more hands-off. And then, of course, the next step is you've got a world that is a machine, and there is no God. So you have a transition from, the gods are making everything happen. They're working, it's like God Incorporated, they're making everything work, to the atheistic view where the world is a machine that doesn't need God. And Berkeley was aware correctly that the closer you get to the world being a machine, the farther away you get from God. So deism is not atheism, but it's basically pretty close. And so Berkeley wanted to push it back to God he's busy 24/7. He's constantly having to do stuff. So I was worried about that. Is God super busy? Like that. Is he like, you know, like AT&T, Verizon, all rolled up into one where he has to handle every single thing that should do? And if he just, I guess it's good that he's omnipotent, because otherwise it'd be impossible. Yeah, and so it is an interesting view about God. You know, again, you've got the God builds the world, and he builds it so well it can just kind of let it run itself, versus God is doing everything. And Berkeley thinks God is doing everything. Because he wants to, and he thinks this, you know, really hammers the atheist, because he says to the atheist, well, if there isn't any God, you wouldn't have anything. You wouldn't have any ideas, there'd be nothing. And so he makes God, you know, super important. Now, there are, of course, some problems. One problem is this. God, of course, is not a sensory quality. So, he claims we can only have ideas of sensory qualities, and we can't have ideas of spirits, going back to what he said before. So we end up with a dilemma. God is a spirit, and we can't have ideas of spirits. So there seem to be two options. One is, if we can't have an idea of God, we can't conceive that it is possible that things exist in his mind. In other words, if we have no idea of God, we can't have any ideas of God, which is a problem. Because then the question would be, you know, if we can't have an idea of God, then we have no idea of God, so how do we know, how do we have empirical evidence of God? But if we can conceive of God without having an idea of God, then we could conceive of matter without having an idea of matter, which would be bad. So basically the problem is this. If Berkeley says you can't have ideas of spirit, the objection is, well then how do we know about God? If we can't have an idea of God, then we can't have an idea of God. So no evidence of God. That's bad. That's, you know, win for the atheist. If we can have an idea of God, despite Berkeley saying we can't have ideas of spirits, then we could also have an idea of matter. Because we can have ideas of things that we're not supposed to have ideas of, so why not matter? So why not materialism? Why not atheism? So it seemed that we'd end up in a bad situation. Either no justification for God's existence, or we can believe in matter. And Berkeley believes in matter, leads to skepticism, which leads to atheism, so both are bad. So, how does he reply to that? Well, he does what any clever philosopher would do. He makes up some stuff. Specifically, he comes up with a notion of notion, which is, you know, imagine just another word for idea. So what do notions work like? Well, what he says is this. You can't have an idea of the spirit, so he claims. But he claims you can know your own mind, even though according to him, you have no idea about it. You have no picture of your mind, so to speak. What you have is a notion. Now, of course, what a critic would say is, come on, Berkeley, you're just using a new word. You're cheating.
Yeah, same notions.
Yeah, and Berkeley would say, no, I'm not. I've got notion. A notion's not an idea. Now, Berkeley himself did see a problem. In his dialogue, he has one of the characters note, well, given his own principle, that we can't have like an idea of the mind, just a notion, it would seem that what a person is just a floating batch of ideas without any substance, because we can't have an idea of a substance. All we have is ideas of ideas. Now, this goes back to, you know, Locke's argument. Locke says, you know, we don't know, you know, substance is something we don't know what. And Locke sort of reluctantly accepted. Locke's like, this is really crazy, but I haven't got any other option. And Berkeley seems to end up there as well. Namely that it would seem that a person is just a bundle of ideas, because we don't have any notion or idea of substance. Now the next dead guy we look at, David Hume, will say, yeah, you have no empirical evidence of substance, so you really are just a bundle of ideas. But Berkeley didn't seem to see this as a problem and didn't really seem to see the implications. So sort of ironically, he accused Locke of not going far enough, not being consistent, but he himself doesn't go far.
I thought that with the whole idea thing, that he thought that we didn't have ideas.
Oh, we don't. We don't have ideas. Well, we have ideas, but we can't have ideas of spirits.
Yeah.
But then he says we can have, from our own mind, we can have a notion of spirit, or claims. But then the reply to that is, well, he's just making up stuff. Yeah, he's not going to go, like, no, we don't have this. It's not a tax. It's just a fund fee. Like, no, that's a tax, man. And then, of course, you run into the problem that if you can't have an idea of substance, all we can have is like ideas of ideas, but no ideas of substance. It would seem that all we know that exist are ideas. So all there is ideas, no spirits. And as mentioned, Hume, our next dead guy, he accepts that. He says we have no idea of substance, so we can't believe in it. We just have ideas, or so it is. Now Berkeley, like many of the other dead guys we looked at, he wants to keep science. So a good question would be, how do you have science in an immaterial world? Because, I mean, if you think about it, like physics, the name itself talks about physical stuff. So how would you have science in an immaterial world, where everything is idea and spirit? Well, one option, of course, would be to just jettison science. But he doesn't want to do that. He wants to keep science. What he wants to do is get rid of matter. Because, again, he thinks that matter leads to skepticism, which leads to atheism. It's a gateway drug. So, what he claims is this. And he's basically trying to use our good friend Occam's classic razor. There was a guy named William of Ockham. It says it's spelled differently, but he came up with this thing that's known as, or referred to as Occam's razor. And the injunction is, do not multiply entities beyond necessity. And it's become sort of a hallmark of philosophical reasoning and science. Put another way, the idea is that if you have two explanations for something, and they do equally well, except one is more complicated, or has more entities, then the simpler is better. Or put in simple terms, simpler is better. Now, Berkeley's argument is classic Occam's razor. What he says is this. To explain the world, he claims, we can explain everything without matter. So we can explain all the science stuff. We can do all the physics, do all the equations, do all that stuff, and we don't need to say that there is matter. Berkeley thinks we can do it all with spirit and ideas. So the argument would go, if you can explain everything with spirit without matter, that's a more economical, a simpler, cheaper theory than one that involves matter and spirit. It's cheaper than dualism. And the idea is if you don't need something to explain it, and it does nothing, there's no reason to think that it does exist. And again, this is also used in the sciencey stuff. For example, suppose you have two theories of physics, and one includes, say, 3 basic forces, and it works fine, explains all the stuff. Another one has 6 basic forces. It explains equally well, but it's got a lot more, more stuff. Well, the idea is that less is better. You need less stuff. It's based on a principle of economy, just like, to use an analogy, if you've got, suppose you have 2 phones. And they do the same stuff, except one costs $100 and one costs $500. But otherwise, they do exactly the same stuff. Which one do you buy? Yeah, less cost. Likewise with the theories. The idea is if you say that if you postulate, entities, it raises the cost of the theory. So Berkeley's saying we don't need matter. We can do all we need to have done without matter, so don't need it. Which is a good argument. If you don't need it, you don't need it. Now, this of course does lead to kind of a intuition problem, namely this. We generally think about science as, especially physics and biology, being about material objects. We think of literally, physics is, well, physics. It's physical stuff. Matter and motion governed by mathematics. Now, if everything's ideas, it's all like in the mind, what would science be? What would laws of nature be? It seems to run, counter to that. Wouldn't it all just be God just thinking this stuff? Well, Berkeley says this. The laws of nature are rules that God has set up to cause ideas in us. And we learn them by experience. For example, take fire. What do we know about fire? And our hands.
Fire?
Yeah.
It's
And,
hot.
yeah.
It can burn you.
Yeah, so you learn not to do what with your hands?
Such as
Yeah, not to put your hands in fire. What do we learn about ice cream?
It's cold.
Cold and
sticky.
and delicious.
Can
So we learn to eat ice cream.
you repeat the line about the laws of nature are rules that God?
Rules that God uses, well, by which God causes sensory experiences in us. So basically, as he sees it, crudely put, we can kind of think of the law, when we think of the laws of nature, is God has, to use a metaphor, it's like he's got a rule book. And he follows those, in general he follows those rules. So what we do, for example, is, since we normally think of like fire would be like, the oxidation of, an oxidation process. And we think of it in terms of physics, particles and heat and energy and so forth. For Berkeley, I guess the best way to explain it is literally like a video game. We're in a video game. And of course, in a video game, it's not physical. The things you encounter are just images. And the way they work is set by the code. And the designers can code in any way. So, for example, they get a fire that does nothing. You could walk your character into the fire and stand there. Or they could code it so you take damage when you walk into the fire. And so, to use the analogy, from Berkeley's view, the world is essentially a video game. Ideas and God's rules are like the code governing the game, that make stuff happen. So God is like a rule, fire burns. So when you touch fire, when you touch the idea of fire with your idea of your hand, you get the idea of pain. When you touch ice cream, when you're eating ice cream, you get the idea of coolness, sweetness, deliciousness. And so he has rules for everything. And so Berkeley, as he sees it, what we do when we do science is we try to figure out the laws of nature by observing what happens. And we're trying to sort of figure out, okay, handling fire hurts. Okay, rule, fire hurts. Fall off something, ow. Rule of gravity is you fall down. Falling down hurts. Poke Wolverine with stick. Wolverine attacks. Okay, poking Wolverine with stick hurts. Showing us, the basic fact of life. Life hurts. And so we learn all these rules basically by poking things with sticks and touching things. And we learn how stuff works.
From experience. That's
Yeah.
the experience.
Yeah, and so what we're trying to do is, from Berkeley's view, God has his rule book of how he does things, and we try to recreate that rule book based on our experience. So we see how fire works, and we have notes about fire. We look at the planets, we see how they work, and we take notes about that and try to figure out how they work. So in a way, we're trying to guess what's in God's rule book based on our experiences. So causation for him is not one thing causes another. So for example, when you put your hand in fire, the fire is not burning your hand, because he claims ideas can't cause other ideas. I mean, again, a good analogy of this is video games. If you're writing a video game and you create the graphics for like fire, and you put like a character in the fire, the image of the character in the fire, nothing's going to happen. Or to use another, maybe a worse analogy, suppose you get a picture of fire, and you copy paste a picture of a person into the fire. What happens to the picture of the person?
It goes wet, maybe burns it.
Well, no. Well, imagine you're doing this like in Photoshop. You paste in a picture of a person. What happens?
Nothing.
Yeah, nothing. You gotta, because if you want to make the fire burn in a video game, you've got to write the code to make the burn.
So if he's saying like in real life, even though we might, be regular, it's still the idea that it hurts that we're feeling?
Yeah. Yeah, so what God, just like if you're coding a video game, you just can't have like the image of fire and image of the character and put them together, nothing's going to happen. You have to code in, how fire works and how it works on the character. And likewise, if you had your idea of your hand in fire and God didn't do anything, it wouldn't hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So God has to make it, he gives you the idea of fire, you get the idea of putting your hand in the fire, and God gives you the idea of pain. And that way we made the connection that fire doesn't really hurt, it's that God hurts us when we touch fire. Yeah, so God is running a video game. He makes all this stuff happen. He hurts us a lot. But love is a hurting thing. And God loves us a whole bunch. So what we do then is we work out, again, video game is a perfect analogy. If you play a video game, sometimes the way it works is different than the real world. You can maybe jump farther, you may have special abilities, you're playing like a superhero game or a fantasy game, and you figure out the rules based on how it goes. Likewise, as Berkeley sees it, we figure out the rules of the world by playing the world game. We learn how God has set things up. So then, as he sees it, science doesn't get rid of religion. We need God to explain everything, because everything is God. Why does fire burn? God. Why do planets orbit each other? God. Everything is God. Now, he also is able to account for miracles pretty easily here. And Berkeley, believes in miracles. Now, the deists typically rejected miracles because they believe God creates, a well-ordered world, sets it in motion. Yeah, miracles, it's like, it's God's, messing with it. And so it's like, to use kind of an analogy, it'd be like if you have a person who's a great, engineer, they build something that doesn't fall apart. So you don't have to call them constantly to have it you have to keep poking at it. It's like, think of like a car. If you have a car that's well designed, it always starts and gets you where you're going. If you have a car that's falling apart, you've always got to be messing with it. It's the deist thought, God builds a really good world, he doesn't have to mess with it. And Berkeley's view is God is always there. It's like a really, it's a car that can't run without God. And so he claims miracles are really easy because God is constantly doing stuff. So he can make a miracle happen because, well, in a way, kind of a miracle is nothing really special because God is doing everything anyways. So given Berkeley's view, putting your hand in fire and feeling heat would be just as miraculous as touching someone and raising them from the dead. Because basically God has to make everything happen. In a way, everything is either a miracle, because God's making everything happen by direct intervention, or in a way nothing is, because it's all basically the same. Now he does consider a scriptural argument, because the Bible says that God created the heaven and the earth, 6 days, etc., etc. but it doesn't say he created ideas. Now, of course, the easier reply is this. The Bible also doesn't say that God created matter. It says he created the heaven and the earth. And so Berkeley says God creates all we experience, but there's nothing in the Bible that says God created matter, which is true. So, works out. Now, what about, lastly, what about time and space? Excuse me. Now, since it's all ideas, there is no space in the usual sense. There's no three-dimensionality. So, what does he do with that? Well, what he claims is this. Both space and time are merely relations between experiences. So, they're not features of reality, they're features of our experience. I mean, distance is easy to handle. Think of, like if you go to a 3D movie. Is the movie really 3D? No, because otherwise you'd be touching touching stuff. It just looks 3D. And as Berkeley points out, what seems to be three-dimensional could, just be a matter of, size, shading, and proportion. And computer technology and movies show that quite nicely. He also claims that things like gravity, force, etc., are not metaphysical entities. So if you ask Berkeley, is there gravity as a force? Berkeley would say no. There's just God. It's all God. There's no gravity, there's no electromagnetism, it's all God. I mean, again, a video game is a perfect analogy. In a video game, there's no gravity, there's no electromagnetism, there's none of that. It's just code making the graphics act a certain way. And if you take the graphics to be like ideas, and the code to be God, that's Berkeley. It's a video game reality. God's making it all happen. So, for Berkeley, he embraces virtual reality. It's totally virtual, but it's also real. Now, so is he right? Are you convinced? Do you think, yep, drinking
Now,
ideas?
This argument, I don't know, I'm not sure, because he was kind of like, I don't want to say all over the place, but it's kind of like, how you have, he wasn't as convincing for me as the first one, because it's like, I agree with some of his points, but how you have that, like for Descartes, for example, like their preset notion of what you've always known. It's like, of course, there's going to be some type of skepticism when you hear this argument, but it's like, is it enough to make you feel like you're right about everything? It's like, no, not for this argument. Especially about, like the miracles. Like, and he doesn't feel as if they're special because he feels like they always happen. So it's like.
Well, he thinks they're special.
Oh,
but,
he thinks they're special?
Yeah, but the problem would be is that.
He thinks they're equal, right?
Well, he thinks they're something extraordinary, but kind of I guess I should have been clear. Kind of the thing is that they can have it's kind of a paradox. Because on one hand, since God's constantly doing stuff, miracles are easy to explain. God is constantly doing stuff, so all he has to do is.
Oh, so he's saying like the explanation is okay.
Yeah, but then my kind of potential criticism would be that in a way that miracles are not anything special because a miracle is basically something that goes outside of the natural order of things.
Right.
But since God is doing everything
always,
anyways,
it's not out of the natural order.
It's God, because miracle is God doing something. Well, God is always doing stuff in a way.
Okay.
But I guess you could go with he does something that he usually doesn't do. So I guess you take that to be a miracle. Or something good that he did, because miracles are usually seen as good, as opposed to like plagues and curses, which are less good. Now, critics of Berkeley have claimed that he falls victim to not a unilemma, which probably can't be, or a dilemma, but the dreaded trilemma. So, the criticism basically is this. Given Berkeley's view, it seems he ends up into three potentially bad things. The first problem is this. There's a philosophical view called solipsism. Solipsism is the view, and it's a personal view, it's the view that all that exists in my case, is just me. I am the only thing in existence. It's all in my mind. And in your case, it would be, although from a solipsist, I wouldn't believe there's anybody else, but from your standpoint, it would be that everything is in your mind. So how does Berkeley lead to solipsism? Well, he claims we can't conceive of any object existing unperceived. And
That's the first, potentially back in.
yeah, because,
Catholicism?
yep. Now he claims, basically the problem is this. All I can perceive for sure is my own ideas. I can, as the arguments have shown, I can never get out of my mind. So, if all I can perceive is my own ideas, the only evidence I have of something existing for sure, is myself. I mean, we end up in Descartes' skepticism. It'd be like him without the evil demon. It's just him. Now, it could be argued, like Berkeley does. Berkeley says, well, there's God. I have ideas of God. But, obviously a skeptic could say, or a critic could say, well, no, I don't really have an idea of, he says we have ideas of God, but I just seem to have ideas that are just in my mind. It seems to be the only evidence I have is that it's just me. And so it would seem, if we accept that ideas just exist in the mind, that would seem to slide into solipsism. All there is me and my ideas. And the problem is, how would I show, Berkeley tries to do this. He tries to say, oh, no, there's God. You can be sure God exists. But if someone doesn't buy that argument, they would say, no, the only thing I know for sure is that I exist. And that's solipsism. Now, even though there's no real compelling argument against it, solipsism is seen as one of those crazy things in philosophy that no sane person accepts. So if someone ends up as a solipsist, that's seen as very bad. Although a person could argue that it's not so bad at all. Second problem. Now, Berkeley wants to avoid representational realism, because that's the view that you have ideas in your mind that match objects out there. And Berkeley, is totally against that, because that would be, stuff out there would be, matter. So, problem. Now, Berkeley seems to end up this way. How so? Well, this is what he claims. God, of course, perceives everything perfectly. So that would seem to entail that reality, as it exists for God, is not the same thing we perceive. Because God is to perceive not only everything we perceive, but everything that everything could perceive ever. So all possible perceptions. And so this would seem to lead to a representative realism. Namely, there are God's ideas that are the real objects, then there are our ideas of God's ideas. So you end up with kind of a weird representational realism. Because for Locke, we have ideas of objects outside of our mind. And for this argument, we have ideas about ideas outside of our mind, which aside from the idea part would just be representational realism, which would of course lead to the skepticism. How do we know that our idea matches the idea that God has? And the answer, of course, we don't. And we end up with the same problem, except it's a weirder problem. Instead of how do we know objects out there match our ideas, it's how do we know God's ideas match our ideas? And we don't. So, problem. Last problem there, pantheism. Now, if we accept that our ideas are just us, then again we end up with solipsism. If we accept that it's us and God has ideas in his mind, and we have ideas of those ideas, representational realism leading to skepticism, bad. But what if it's all just ideas in God's mind? Yeah, then we end up in pantheism. We're back to Spinoza. We're all just God's ideas. So the reason why it's a trilemma, it's either it's just me, which is crazy. Yeah, us and God's ideas, which is just back to normal representational realism. It's just, external world, us, which Berkeley didn't want. Or we're all in God's mind, which is also crazy. So crazy, super crazy, and what?
Mildly crazy.
Yeah. Or what he wanted to avoid. So it's all bad.
Right.
And then he died. And he's still dead today. That didn't kill him, though. It was the tar water that killed him. Now to wrap up Berkeley, final problems. One thing we saw, of course, was his argument that we cannot conceive of arguments existing unperceived, because he claims if you are thinking of a tree, going back to what we talked about last time, he says, okay, you can prove that I'm wrong. All you have to do is perceive, say, a tree, just to conceive of perceiving a tree with no one perceiving it. And of course, you can't do that because you can't perceive of perceiving something without perceiving it. It'd be like saying, I want you to draw something that's not drawn without drawing it. And of course, you'd say, I can't do that. But the criticism is that Berkeley seems to be taking perceiving and conceiving to be the same. That picturing and thinking of something is one and the same. And critics have said, well, that's kind of a cheat. It seems we can conceive of something, like an object existing without being perceived, without perceiving it, that they're two different things. Secondly, notions. As we saw before, notion seems like a cheat. He says, okay, ideas don't work, notions, how about that? And critics say, well, that's, if they're like ideas, that doesn't work. If they're not like ideas, that's a total cheat. So either way, it doesn't save the day. Now, Berkeley also claimed to be the philosopher of common sense. But does his view seem common sense? No, it seems pretty weird. Which is not a mark against it, because maybe stuff is weird. Now, the next guy we'll look at, David Hume, was pretty critical of Berkeley. He said, the only effect of his arguments is to create a momentary amazement, then confusion. And in his own time, even the theists didn't really buy his arguments. So a good question to be is, so why do we still talk about Berkeley? Well, one is, he did raise important questions about the assumptions philosophers and scientists had. Secondly, he does show us where empiricism leads. And critics of empiricism say empiricism leads to madness. It leads to not just crazy town, but crazy universe. And so you don't want to get on that train, because you don't want to go where it's going. Also, some people do actually end up accepting his view, phenomenalism or phenomenology, that everything is just ideas. There are still people who accept that. We call those people crazy people. They get on the crazy train. Also, his approach to philosophy, use of language, etc., did, even though people didn't, not everyone bought it, did have a significant influence on the development of later philosophy. So it's one of those cases where, maybe his own view didn't work out, but it was useful to others. And of course, his rejection of Newtonian, philosophy of science later seems to be vindicated. We no longer accept absolute space and time, and we accept their relativity, and the role of the observer is an important one. So Berkeley does offer quite a bit, except for that tar water stuff. Don't drink that. So that brings us to the end of our good dead friend George Berkeley. And when next we meet, we will proceed to our next good dead friend, David Hume.